Yeah.
Right, hello everybody. This is the Home Educators Qualifications Association webinar. So we are an organisation that helps home educators who are taking exams just know a bit more about it, be able to feed that back to exam boards and other organisations. If you could make sure you're muted so you don't show up on the recordings, that would be great. And tonight we're going to be talking about revision and preparation for exams, because if you've got exams this summer, that's what's on your mind right now. All right, so Sarah, can you just click onto the next screen? Brilliant. So tonight we'll do sort of Sarah and I talking together over a few basic points. You can put any particular questions into the chat. If I know we're getting to them, we might just leave that until the end. If it needs answering straight away, we'll respond to it. We are going to have a Q&A section right at the end there, and that can be about anything. It doesn't have to be just revision. It can be any question you've got about exams. Let us know and we'll get to it then. But basically we're going to say, what do you need to know before the exam? And this is both you and have your child ready, so when they go in, they know what they're expecting. They can respond to anything that's not quite right. Just general stuff about revision, exam prep, how you get ready to actually take that exam, resources that you can use, and in particular past papers, because they're quite a key resource. We'll talk about how you can access them, how you can use them. Okay, I think we're ready to go.
So I'm just dealing with something you can't hear, so I'm going to flick on and let you carry on, Katie.
Yep, I will do. And sometimes if you do have problems with hearing, which isn't very useful to the person who can't hear, just logging back out, logging back in again. That's often a good way to fix things. Okay, so Sarah, did you want me to do this?
Yeah, you may just start.
Okie dokie. So what do you need to know before the exams? And this is partly you double checking that all of the entries are in correctly, but a lot of it is actually about making sure that your child is ready for this, because particularly for private candidates, you may be going into a centre where lots of people are sitting lots of different exams, and they're just human. They're, you know, invigilators, people like anyone else. Sometimes they make mistakes. You might get the wrong paper handed out, so it's really useful for your child to know exactly what they're doing and what to expect. So key thing, which specification are you entered for? You will have been decided when you're putting the entry in, so double check again that it's the one you're expecting. Just a quick recap, there are different exam boards. So a subject, so say you've got something like maths, then multiple different exam boards will offer a maths exam that you can choose. They've got kind of fairly strict rules, so they're all basically the same level of difficulty. They're covering the same sorts of things, but sometimes they're not exactly the same. They may have different options. They may have different topics. So it is important that you know exactly which specification and which exam board you are entered with. Because particularly for some subjects that could be completely different. You know, you could have prepared for a topic that is only in one exam board. It's important that you get that one. You need to know when the exams are. Your exam centre should be telling you all of this, but they are exam timetables are also available online. So each of the exam board websites will have it. There's also JCQ. And JCQ is an organisation that is the main GCSE exam boards. They're all part of JCQ, and they all kind of talk together to make sure that they're doing the exams at the same time. So something like your maths exam will be the same time, no matter which board it is. So they publish a exam timetable, and if you just search GCSE exam timetable summer 23, that'll come up. And you can check on there, check when your papers are. And they will be specified as either in an AM or a PM slot. So how that works is that there is a window in which exam centres can start it, because they can't all be ready like precisely on the dot of 9 a.m. or something. They've got different times that people come in, different normal start times. So they get an hour's window. And I think Sarah may
it
be
starts
able
at
to
9 JCQ, so that's the GCSEs, and EdXLI GCSEs follow the same rules. They don't have to, but they choose to, because it's easier for a person to do the same for the IGCSEs as they do for the GCSEs. They have a published start time of 9 o'clock for morning exams, 1:30 for afternoon exams, and that gives them half an hour leeway either side for your exam centre to start the exam. They can start them at other times if there's clashes or what have you, but they don't need permission from the exam board to start out half an hour either way. That's a cushion that they're allowed to.
Yeah, and they also have strict rules about big under supervision. So the idea behind that window is during that time they need to make sure that everyone who is taking the exam stays in it for a certain amount of time, so that they don't leave and potentially tell someone who hasn't yet started their exam.
Yeah, Cambridge is slightly different. They publish what is called a key time, and that is the time that everybody who is sitting that exam is supposed to be under exam centre supervision. Reality for you, it doesn't really matter. It matters for the exam centre who's doing the paperwork. As far as the people sitting the exam are, you need to know what time you need to be at your exam centre, and your exam centre will tell you that. So
yeah,
don't worry what other people are doing, what it says on the exams group or anything like that. Your exam centre will tell you what time to start.
And they may well want a window of, want you there 3/4 of an hour earlier or something, so that they can do all of their admin and make sure they've got everybody in place before the start time. So particularly afternoon ones, it can vary a bit what time they want you there. Sarah mentioned their clashes. So that's something that comes up. If you look on the timetable and you've got 2 different subjects and they both have an exam in the same slot, that's okay. That happens a lot. And exam centres know how to deal with that. So what they will do is they will move one of the exam papers either before or afterwards, depending on how the slots work out. So for instance, my daughter had one last year that was 2 exams in the same afternoon slot. So she started one of them a little bit earlier, about sort of 11:45, sat that one, had a half-hour break, and then sat the other one, and so was finished at that sort of 3:30 normal kind of time. So as long as you're in the same exam centre, they will deal with that. And again, they'll tell you what time you need to be there for each exam. How many papers and how long, that's useful for you to know, so you know what you're going in for, you've got everything. Also important here is languages. So if you have a language speaking assessment, those are usually done much earlier on, and they have a window. So they don't you have to do it on, Monday the 3rd in the afternoon. The exam centre has a period of, I think it's about a week, and they can organise it at any point within those times. So again, your exam centre will tell you when that needs to be. How long is also important if you do access arrangements, because you will have additional time potentially, depending on what access arrangement you've got. But if you have a 25% extra time, you'll need to sort of be aware of that, and your child be aware of that when you're looking at timings for how long those exams are. So yeah, looking at what the papers look like, we'll see this at past papers. You can see online what the front of the paper will be. So you want your child ready to know that they've got all of the bits that they should have. So if they've got inserts, they know whether they've got additional information in a separate book, maybe that they've got to look at. Sometimes formula sheets are separate. Sometimes they're just printed on the front page if they have one. Where they need to write things. So if they need to write their name and their centre number, and the centre number will be up somewhere in the centre. They don't need to remember them. Typically,
and
they'll.
Same with the candidate number. Candidate number and centre number are usually on the desk, but it will depend on the exam centre. But you do not need to remember those.
Yeah, you don't need to memorise them. They will have them somewhere for you to write down. But yeah, they need to know what, and that they're not allowed to turn over and look at their paper until they're told to. They need to know what the front paper of their exam will look like. So again, because there may be lots of people doing lots of different exams, it is possible they'll get given the wrong one, and they need to know what to do. And what you do is you put your hand up and you tell the invigilator and you say, I was expecting Edexcel International GCSE, and this is the HEQA regular GCSE. Can you sort that out? And they will. They're there to help.
Particularly no tiers. So if it's got higher or foundation, they need to know which they are getting. That is a key one. And the other one is familiarise them with what it says on science exams. Particularly if you're doing Edexcel, I will tell you the number of times I've been told that a candidate has the wrong exam paper. And they're right to tell me if they think they've got the wrong exam paper, but because they're expecting to be doing triple science is the key one. And they're worried that it says double science on the front when they're only doing biology, or that it says biology on the front when they're doing double science. So know what it's going to say on the front of your paper. And they're there on the exam board website. We're going to point them out to you a little bit later. But don't let the first time they sit down in an exam be the first time they see the front cover. It's really crucial that they know what the exam paper looks like from the front.
Yeah, and the thing there with the science is the way that Edexcel sciences work is that they have the option, you can do a combined science, which is the paper 1 of physics, chemistry and biology. And that gives you 2 GCSEs across the whole thing. Or you can do single sciences. And that's, so the biology will be that same paper 1. So the paper 1 will say double science or combined science award paper 1 on it. But then you sit an extra paper 2 that is just for that subject. And those 2 together give you your 1 GCSE in that subject. So it's all explained in the specifications, which, you know, hopefully by this point you are familiar with, and you've been working towards. But sometimes if you've just been looking at a textbook and you haven't done that step back of looking at the spec, it can be a surprise. So just make sure you know that, and we're going to show you where all these things are a little bit later on.
And Cambridge have weird numbering. So if you do Cambridge papers, then that. Often there's a paper 4. And everybody says, what happened to paper 3? I didn't sit paper 3. It's like, no, it's fine. Paper 3 is coursework. Paper 4 is alternative to coursework. So that's another familiar one that comes up in the exam centre. Invigilators often aren't experts on those exact individual papers. So they will go away and check if they think it's the wrong one. But it helps if your student is confident and knows what they're doing on each day and what the paper is supposed to say.
Yeah, and practice that. What do you do if something's not right? Put your hand up, wait for them to come over and ask you, and practice a line to say this has got a bit wrong, because you're in the exam, you're really nervous, what the bit of paper in front of you isn't what you expected. That can be a bit of a freeze moment for some kids. So if you just practice, okay, if this happens, this is what we're going to do, they're ready for it.
Check what you're allowed to take in. So it's always worth knowing, am I allowed to take a calculator? Particularly if it's maths GCSE versus IGCSE. Do I need to take in the books if it's English literature? What am I allowed to take in terms of materials? Some of it, things like drinks, tissues, etc. You should get told this by your exam centre. They tend to make it clear. So keep all emails from your exam centre. I always say put aside a little folder. Any emails from your exam centre, file them, because they might come quite early, so that you've got them there for the day. And quite often it says on the front of the exam paper what you're allowed to have. So when you're familiarising yourself with these exam papers, read that. Access arrangements. Katie mentioned the extra time. it is worth, if you've got access arrangements, familiarise yourself with how they work. So it's always worth, most exam centres will gladly answer questions on things such as, I'm using a laptop, what programme? It really helps that you're familiar with just a little bit of reassurance. And as I say, most exam centres will quite happily answer the questions. So you're not caught out on the day. Should we move on?
Yeah, I think that's all that.
Bit of general points. So
Crib sheets all over the place. Here we go. So the key thing is what we're talking about now is revision. We're going to be focusing on that. Assumes that you have gone over everything and you do sort of know it to some extent in the first place. You will sometimes see people who just kind of go straight into a CGP or revision book. That isn't likely to be enough for you to really get, for your, your child to have a really good understanding of it. You need to have learned it from a non-revision source, so gone over something that's gone into a lot of detail, that's gone into the bits around the edges, that's kind of helped your child to kind of understand and see how it all fits together as a whole. And then you can move on into the more focused revision bits. And there's sort of two parts to exam. And they're both important. I mean, often at this point, we start talking about exam technique and about how, all the little sort of tips and tricks that help you to focus in on exam paper. Those don't help if you don't know what you're answering in the first place. They can hone your answers and they can get your answers into the right sort of format that will make it easy for the examiner to give you the marks, but you do have to know it as well. So the number one thing that will help you in exam is knowing all of the content really well. That's the key thing to focus on. And then the second bit is how you express that in a way that shows it to the examiner. So an exam paper it's a communication. It's an opportunity for your child sitting the exam to show the examiner what they know. And the examiner doesn't know anything about them. They don't know anything unless it is written on that page. So the first thing, when you're used to sort of talking about subjects and, they're used to talking to someone who knows about it as well, you have to write down really obvious things, because all the examiner can work from is what is on the page. So you need to know what the clues are in the questions as to what they're trying to get at. And we'll talk about this a little bit more when we're looking at past papers. So it's about phrasing things so that the examiner can see what you know.
I've said chunk it up. So this is when you split your idea that you need to learn the content and you need to learn the exam techniques. You need to think about how you do both. So when you're trying to make a plan, don't try and do it all in one go. So there's different ways of doing it. I know Katie and I both had quite a similar approach to sort of maths and sciences, where you're learning the topics, but quite often how you approach it is doing an exam paper. You'll find there's quite a lot of gaps the first time you do one. So you focus on revising the content from those exam papers. What I tend to do if I'm doing a humanities type subject is focus on a particular style of exam question. And we might do it open book. I'll focus on a particular topic in the book, particular style of exam question, match them up. And we'll go through all this. So we'll practice every single question. Then we'll practice every bit of topic alongside each other. It's about how many weeks have I got to study this? What do I need to study? Don't spend 5 weeks studying one small topic in exact detail. You have to, at some point, let things go. You will never have everything as well as you want it to.
Poppy, it's okay, come here.
So it's a case of speeding. it's a case of keeping it going, staying on speed. And the best way I say it is, what do I need to cover? Break it down into steps. How long have I got to do it? What do I need to cover each week? Do it that week, move on. If you're lucky, you'll have time to go back to it at the end.
Yeah, and it is important to, when you say you've learnt it once, they won't remember it from seeing something once. You do have to go over and over things multiple times. That's, that's not anything bad about your child if they've done it and they don't remember it. Nobody does. Actually, your brain is optimized to remember the things that it needs to remember. And if you needed something once and you haven't used it again in a year, your brain decides you don't need that. So it's only going to keep the things that you're seeing often and that it believes you need to keep. So it is very, very normal to need to go over things, 2 or 3 times. And the longer you split that up, that helps as well to tell your brain that actually you're going back to this. I'm going to need to keep it.
Yeah, it is. It is absolutely perfectly normal when you come to start revision and it's like they've never learnt the course. It's particularly about this point in the year. It seems to be post-Christmas that there's a big dip in February. They all forget it all. I've seen it with my kids. I've seen it with nearly every child I tutor. This point in the year, it's like bashing your head on the table. You're thinking, have I actually taught these children for 8 months? But it's there. Once you start going over it, you're not learning it afresh. What they're doing is reactivating the memories. So if they've understood it the first time, what you're doing by revision is bringing it back out. And so don't
and also you're linking it up together, and that's quite important because the exams are designed, they have a couple of questions that are designed to just remember a single thing, but often they are about putting multiple things from different bits of the course together, which of course you can't do until you've learned all of it. So it's also a kind of a consolidation phase where you're seeing how things link together. So you will probably find things that they were struggling with earlier on, and actually now you've got some other bits to put them in with. It makes a lot more sense. So that it can work both ways, but you will need to repeat things. And right now it's fine that they don't quite know anything. It'll come back.
I throw this in more because it took me quite a while to get this. The first year I did it with my eldest, there was one wonderful afternoon. It involved him slamming out of the house in a complete temper and me sitting on the kitchen floor crying. And I think we all had those moments during revision. Maybe not quite so dramatic, but it's difficult. But and particularly when you got an idea of what revision looks like. For me, I'm a note taker. I learn by writing it down. I learn by highlighting. I have pretty coloured notes. My boys would not write any notes at all. And it's just not the way they learned. They didn't see any point when there was proper revision books. The idea of a highlighter. Midway through A levels, the youngest is starting to use a highlighter. And it's like a novel experience, despite years and years of me telling him it's a good idea. So your children have to find their way of doing it. And if it's not yours, it is quite difficult to actually accept that their way works. But we didn't have all the tech. There's some brilliant online resources now for revision. It just wasn't there when I was revising mine. The way you revised when I was there was write your notes, make your own flashcards. But there's so much other stuff now. And the same, they're their exams. And it's probably harder for us as home educators because you do feel like the responsibility is on you and that people are judging you on it, whether home ed is a success or what have you. But it's not about you. You can lead them, you can give them all the tools. They have to do the final bit of work themselves. They have to be the ones that pass the exams. And if they don't do the work, sometimes it is a case of just letting it.
Mm.
You cannot make it happen. You can only encourage. And it's not down to you. And for all of this, I've shown my picture earlier on a different group. And I share this on the exams group every single year in the run up to it. We talked you through a little bit of how to make a plan. And I always start off with a plan. Somewhere in the exams group, there's a file that's got all my links to planning, keeping track of how many exam papers you've done, keeping the grades in that you scored on them. And it's lovely. I've got lovely, pretty, colourful ones. Anybody's welcome to use them. But sometimes it's more like this. And right now, expect to be at the bottom of this pond. January, February. This is the point where you're trying to reach for that rope in March to try and get yourself out of it. It's tough going at the moment. But steep climb ahead and it gets there. We all get there in the end. So keep an eye on the time. Look at some resources. I've tried not to mention too many specific resources. There's some already linked on the wiki. HE Exams wiki, people don't know us. I share it in a moment. But I'm going to go in over the weekend and tart up, shall we say, the past papers page in the resources and revision resources. Make it a little bit easier. Do you want to do the example resources, Katie? And I'll
Yeah, I'm just popping that HE Exams wiki link in the chat so everyone can see what we're talking about. So the wiki is a resource that's been built up over many years by lots of home educators, mostly Sarah at the moment, but lots of other people have also contributed to it now and in the past. It's a really, really valuable resource to use it, particularly look at the subject pages. They've got subject specific resources for these things.
yeah, most of them I've updated recently, so they are, the subject pages are probably the most recently and well maintained pages on there. So as I said, I'll add the past papers page. There's one already there, and I've started adding extra links to it, and it's a useful.
And they're also often, so there's the main exams Facebook group, which probably many of you have found us through in the first place. There are also often subject specific groups, and they can be really useful, you know, both for finding out resources and things that other people recommend, also actually for just asking questions. Like I've got a maths group and we love it if you put in a maths question, because there's a good 4 or 5 of us who just love doing maths questions, and we'll help you out with all of the answers. So use the other people. We're all happy to help.
Yeah, if you're on the main exams group that we mentioned, there's a list of those groups in the files. There's a file with a whole list of them.
Yeah, and some of them are linked again from the wiki, I think, as well. So those are the sort of the home ed specific bits, but there are the exam board pages. Go on, Sarah, pick one. So this is the exam board website. Remember, we talked earlier that each subject that you're sitting will be offered by a particular exam board. So you should know which exam board is offering the subject that you're studying. So for instance, this is an Edexcel International GCSE in maths. So you get to here, and the first thing, if you haven't come across this yet, is the specification. This is what you need to work from really at revision stage. This tells you everything that they can ask you about in the exam. So within the specification, there's a list that they will tell you the content of the exam. And for maths, that's things like, you know, Pythagoras theorem, it's sine rule, it is a list of all the things they can ask you. They will not ask you, they will ask you to apply those things to new situations sometimes. But they won't know if matrices is not in your specification, they will not ask you a question about it. So the things in the specification are the things that you need to know. And depending on the subject, there's more or less detail in that. So for English, the specification might say analysing texts, whereas for science, the specification will say you need to know about this reaction. So knowing about this reaction is a more solid thing that you can work to than knowing how to analyze a text, but it's all still, these are the things that you need to know how to do, and they're in the spec. So that is your number one resource. As well as that, we're going to look at, so this will be different, what's on offer, different per exam board and different per subject, but they will often have a lot of extra things available that we called something like teaching and learning materials, or topic resources. They've all got a different name for it, but if you sort of click around on those subject pages,
there's a reason why we've gone with Pearson though. Pearson is probably the best of the main boards. Educast is very, very good.
OCR are quite good, but they seem to be moving more stuff behind their paywall at the moment, but they have been quite good. So here there'll be past papers, which we'll get to in a minute, but there's things like Edexcel often have a getting started guide. I don't know if they have one for maths.
Guide, yeah. There we go.
This getting started guide is often really, really helpful. It will talk through the exam, the assessment structure. So it talks through what's called assessment objectives. That's the things that they're looking for in each question. It can talk through command words. That's another really useful concept. That's a word that they use in the question that gives you a clue as to how they want you to answer it. So they have particular ones. So they might be something like define, might be something like explain. And those words, particularly for Edexcel, but generally have very particular meanings. So if they say explain, they usually want what happens and why does it happen? And there'll be separate marks for those separate things. So you could write a massively great question on why something happens, but if you haven't covered what it is, you don't get that extra mark.
And also it varies slightly by subject.
Yes.
I'm listening to Katie and thinking that's not the way it behaves in business studies.
Yeah.
It means slightly different. But
So,
this is where the getting started guide really does help you. Because it will tell you for that particular specification, and it is pretty much unique to Pearson Edexcel. But if you're doing an Edexcel spec, look it up. Yeah,
and there's often other things on here.
So
this has one. Sometimes they have topic guides. They don't usually cover everything, but I think they've targeted them to things that there's often problems with, or it's in something new that they've introduced, for instance. And so sciences quite often have this. I think there's one on bonding for chemistry, and that's got extra information and extra useful topic guides in there. Otherwise, just sort of click around to see what there is.
So exam class, I'll mention those a little bit more probably when we do past papers, but they're a really useful thing because they are examples of how students have answered questions and how they've been marked. So they really help you get to grips with what the examiner is looking for.
Yeah, and that's particularly important, I think, sort of more on the humanities side, because it can seem a bit impenetrable. But the more you look at past papers, the more you look at the spec. So you start with the spec, and those are the points that it's looking for. Then you look at the mark schemes, and you start to see how those mark schemes relate to the points in the spec, and then how the exemplars and the examiner's reports will show you where the gaps that people often fall down, and how you can sort those out and improve them. So exam board resources, they are a really good place to look. Start there. Next up, I think.
And my thing go back. I've lost my yesterday, like every single time.
There we go. So sort of revision notes. So generally, when you think, oh, I need to revise, you buy a revision guide, and what that is a set of just kind of notes that tell you the key points, again, of all of those points within the spec that you need to know. So those are your sort of your standard CGP revision guides. You can usually get them. They're not usually too expensive. Not every single subject has them, particularly if you're doing some of the more unusual ones. You know, we did international GCSE human biology. There's very little for that. There's the main textbook, and that's it. That's actually really focused in on that spec. Making your own notes, obviously, ideally your child making their own notes can be really, really valuable. Both the process of making them is massively valuable, but also, you know, if they've done that themselves, then having to cut it down to what are the key points, that's an incredibly good learning, you know, way of learning, because you have to understand it in order to know what's important. There are often online ones, again, for the more popular topics. Maths and physics tutor, have you got that one around, Sarah?
I don't think I have, but it's a
Cognito, what have you got up there?
yeah. I'll let it with the edits.
And again, we're mentioning a couple of specific resources. If you go and look on that HE exams wiki that we've linked to, and when we put it up on YouTube, we'll put a link in there as well. All of these things are linked, and they come up quite a lot in the exams group or Facebook support groups.
That's different now.
So
These
these
isn't possibly the best one to look for, is it? So
science is usually good. Science.
yeah, let's do
Picking an Excel IGCSE, that's the most common one for science. So these topics will match what is in the specification. So again, you already narrowed down what it is that you're looking at. Anyway, somewhere in here, you can click on them and they will basically have you printed revision notes. So it's like a page of a CGP revision guide, but you can get just the bit that you need, print that out. And so you can use that either, you can say, right, I need to go over the whole course again, and I'm going to just focus on one topic a week and go back through revision notes for that. Or you can use them sort of more interleaved, where you've done a past paper and you're like, right, okay, some of that was all right, but the bits on magnetism, they just didn't know anything. So we need to go back in and focus on magnetism. And that's when those kind of particular revision notes and topic questions that we get to later on can be really helpful. Next up, flashcards. Flashcards is what we mostly use for revision personally. So there's this, like I said, your brain needs to know that that information is important, that you're going to come back to it. And a really good way to do that is something called spaced repetition. So what we do with flashcards is we try and do the spaced repetition thing, which means that as you sort of chunk it down into fairly small points. Ideally, it would be just sort of question and answer, but I've never managed to do that, particularly for things like history. So it's sort of a topic and then we talk about it. And so you do that, and you repeat them kind of quite quickly at the beginning, and then you start to spread them out. So your brain goes, okay, I really do need this. I'm going to come back to it later on. So you can literally make your own on a bit of card, write them out. You can use the spec to guide you. You can use whatever you're having problems with in past papers. You know, I aim to have every single spec point with some sort of flashcard on it. I don't always meet that aim, but that's the plan. You can buy packs that have got these in. Again, that will depend on the subject and the board. The more popular ones, so Edexcel IGCSE Sciences, CGP do little packs of flashcards that you can buy from Amazon, and they cover everything. There are also a number of different apps that you can use. That's what we do, because it's just a pain keeping track of cards and we can't remember which one we've done, and the app does all that stuff for you. So we use one called Anki, which allows you to, we write our own, so you decide what's going to be on the front and what's going to be on the back. You can also, there's various other sites, quite often they've got pre-made sets of flashcards. Usually they're made just by another user, so you do have to kind of use your own judgment as to how suitable they are, whether they've actually covered all of the key points that you want to cover. Don't just assume because it's on, because it's online, because it's on an official app, it will be good and it will cover everything. Sometimes they're not. but sometimes that's an amazing way to kind of have all that resource ready for you. Again, ideally your child will make their own, but that doesn't always happen. In fact, I don't think that very often happens.
Neither of my boys like flashcards.
Mine, I wouldn't say they enjoy them, but they do recognise that they work. And the way that we do it, they don't sit there on their own repeating them. We do it together.
Yeah.
So it becomes very hands-on, and it'll be me asking the question and we'll talk about it, and we usually end up having a bit of a laugh at some point, mostly over how terrible one or other of our knowledge is. But yeah, it's interactive. They would not really just sit and repeat things and do it on their own.
I do use them with students. I use Quizlet a lot. The idea of anything like that, just cloud. One of mine liked Quizlet, one of them didn't. They all have different ways. So it's a case of, with all of these, it's a case of finding which appeal to your kids.
Yeah, and to you, because if you're getting involved and if you're doing it with them, you know, those different ways of back and forth can really help. And if there's something that you enjoy doing, if you like sort of setting quizzes and you can bring them along, that helps. If they're in a group and they've got someone else that's working with it as well, they might want to do those things kind of with each other. So another sort of way of doing revision notes, for instance, is mind mapping. And that can be a really good way. So you just, if you're going over a topic, just get a big bit of paper and you just get them to write down everything that they can remember or think about that topic and make a big mind map of it. And then when they've kind of finished doing all the things they remember, then you go and look at, you know, something online or back at the topic and add in any extra bits that you've got about. So
and then
there will be different ways, try them all.
And you stick them up on the wall where they sit down to have their tea, so they're facing it. That's what we used to do with the mind maps.
And we find things online. So for my English literature, you know, we just found things on TES, which Times Education Supplement. There's lots of teacher built resources on there, things like Twinkle. They've got some GCSE level resources as well. So we had like a whole load of quotes from Of Mice and Men that we just stuck up on the wall. So it's just around, and every now and again you can talk about them, or they just sort of have a little bit of osmosis. Everyone kind of gets involved in helping them to remember the things they need to remember. Topic questions, you want to take that on? Quizzes, that's probably more your...
So topic questions, these can be things like exam practice booklets where they've broken it. CGP do them, Pearson do them for some of their subjects. They just break, basically they're exam questions, but they're grouped into topics. And we tend to do these before we start doing proper exam papers. So because there's not that many exam papers out there, at least for the subjects we did, and certainly one of mine did them all first sitting. So back in 2019, so that was, we just didn't have exam papers. So we're going to tell you how important exam papers are, but sometimes you don't have them. So at the same time, they're not the be all and end all. They're brilliant when you've got them.
Exam papers are just taking a sample.
Yeah.
So there may, if there's a topic that you need to work on, they won't always be covered in a previous exam paper. And that probably makes it more likely to come up in the next one. So particularly for things like history, if there's a history question been asked before, or an English literature question that's been asked before, they are not going to ask that exact same question again. Yeah,
and actually,
so you need to look at other stuff.
When I did training a while ago on one of the exam boards, we were actually told it's better to write your own questions, which, to be fair, you have to know quite. If you're comfortable with the spec, you can. I wouldn't try and do it for physics, for example, but I can for history. Because once they're on the exam paper, they're dead, they're not going to be asked. If you make up your own, there's a chance you're going to be lucky and hit the right one, which I do it for sociology. And I was quite lucky with, particularly when we were doing we had the advanced notice last year. There was a lot of trying to guess the exam questions for that one.
And that's quite subject specific. Something like maths, actually they do ask probably 80-85% of it each exam. So for maths, you could, if you do a number of past papers, you probably will cover everything that way. But for something like history or, you know, sociology or psychology, you won't. So you need to, yeah, supplement that with other.
And again, quizzes, games, this is what my youngest particularly liked. So we use Seneca, bite size, you read a chunk and ask quizzes on it. Seneca's a similar way, you read a chunk or watch a video, get questions on it. And this particularly worked for mine, it works for a number of my students, particularly that need that interactive and that ticking that they've got it. They're not exam style questions, it's checking knowledge. So you need to separate out that, as we said, the different skills. Seneca won't help you pass it, won't help you with your exam skills, but it will help you get the knowledge to actually do it. Other ones, we use something like Sporkle to write ones for key terms. Games at home. Going back to the whole flashcards one, we tend to do it with things like history. We'd write the dates and it'd be snap, match the date to the event. I do an elaborate thing of homemade board games on historical themes. But I do this a lot. I choose a history, so it's I won't necessarily spend as long as I've done on those, but I can pull them out for that sort of thing. Another one, we do stupid things in the car, or sometimes with my students at the end of lessons, we do things such as, I'm the sociologist, guess who I am? And I've got sort of 10 questions to work out who I am. I can only answer yes or no. And the same with historical figures. So big one is, I'm the German, when we do the German ones, and they've got to try and guess my name. Or I'm an event and they've got to try and guess it. So you can do that. Car journeys. Any time where you just got 5 minutes to kill is.
And another good resource which we haven't put on here but is very worth mentioning is YouTube, and also podcasts actually. So YouTube, there will be videos that are about a particular spec and how to answer the exam questions. So there's Science with Hazel is one that's commonly mentioned for sciences. There are some good English ones. You do have to be a little bit careful with English that it's aimed for the specification you're doing, because some of the very common ones are GCSE English language, which often we don't do. And so when they're talking, you know, if they're just talking about how to analyze language, that doesn't matter. That's all the same. But if they're talking about in question 4, there are these many marks for analysis and there are these many marks for context or whatever, then that does matter which spec it is, because that won't be true necessarily for your questions. But yeah, look on YouTube. There's often good stuff there as well.
Yeah, particularly sort of humanities subjects, the essay type subjects, you can look up and it will how to answer the 9 marker on business edit cell. So you can find that specific thing. You've always got to remember that is one teacher's interpretation. And you'll watch 4 videos and they'll tell you 4 different ways. So you've got to pick the one that most fits with you, or borrow bits from the bits that overlap and think that, well, that will work.
And as with anything, some kids get on with those, some don't. So you've just got to keep having a look around, see the thing that works for you. Right, there's past papers. That's the big one.
So where to find them? You can find them on spec pages. So we did Pearson's. I need to flick back. I was on there, wasn't I? Eventually I get back.
And for everyone except for Cambridge, the exam board website is the place to look. There often are other websites that kind of collect them, but it's not always easy to know whether it's the current specification or not. And they're all just available on the exam board website. So if you go there, you know you're getting exactly the right paper and exactly the right for the right specification. Cambridge is a little bit different, which we'll get on to, but
Yeah.
So on
I've got a
Edexcel
site for
and
Cambridge there. So there's Edexcel, they're under exam materials.
and the very last one for GCSEs will be locked. So
Yes.
if you
So you
actually you click on the first one and you go, hang on, there's a big padlock here and it won't let me look at them. That's true, but that should just be for the most recent paper. Before that, this one, there's loads of them for this one.
Yeah, so you can see November 2021 is unlocked. There's a few oddities with Pearson where they've managed to not unlock the odd weird thing.
Yeah, that seems to be science marks.
No, it's not just science.
No, is it not? Yeah.
But there's a few odd ones where something went wrong with our unlocking system and the odd thing is unlocked, is still locked, but you can usually get it.
So
HEQA, let me find
yep, same thing. They'll have a
Let me
past
find a
paper.
subject that we're likely to do. What home educators likely to do? Let's go for sociology because I know that one.
Yeah. So again, there's your spec that tells you everything is up there, and here's your question papers.
Yeah, and you see these. None of these are locked because their latest ones are on the teacher's website. So all the ones here are the public accessible ones. Edexcel put everything on the same website and then just have it locked. Some of them locked that you've got to log in. AQA have a separate teacher site where all of these are there, plus the locked ones. OCR does OCR. You know what? I should know which they do because I do it. Let me go with classic time.
They sort of have a section, and then they say you have to go and log in on Interchange to get to these ones. So it looks like they're there, but if you click on them, they're not.
Yeah, so they have it here. They haven't got a padlock, but they are.
Yeah.
You see, Interchange login required.
And that's their locked bit. So only exam centres have access to those. You are in theory allowed to ask your exam centre and they're allowed to give you the last one. It varies, like whether they know that they're allowed to do that, whether you sort of have that level of communication with them or not.
Cambridge,
yes,
they do have latest ones on their site, and they do have a sample paper. With all of these as well, when you're looking at papers, don't forget there's a sample paper as well. When you're thinking I've only got 4, there's usually another one as well.
Yeah.
Samples.
And occasionally there's also specimen papers, which are just other example papers that the exam boards put together. Sometimes they're locked, sometimes they're available, but just keep looking. There are sometimes more exam-like papers than you think.
But Cambridge, there's all sorts of sites on there. The 2 big ones are Popper Cambridge and passpapers.co. This is the one that I tend to go to, passpapers.co for mine. So you can find.
And with Cambridge, yeah, Cambridge, they generally have a lot of past papers because not only do they have 2 sittings a year, they also have they cover the whole world. So they need to do usually 3 different papers each sitting for each of the different time zones.
So you can see they're all there.
Yeah, and if you click on them, the other thing to be aware of with Cambridge is each of or a lot of the subjects, you can choose whether they're graded A* to G or graded 1 to 9. The exam papers are the same, but there's 2 different exam codes. And usually those websites that have all the past papers on just have, say, the A* to G ones.
And it's worth knowing that they're slightly different papers sometimes. Yeah. So it's worth.
They're all fine for practice.
Some of the questions overlap, but not all of them.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So
long as they're all fine for practice. So the thing is, if you're doing an 0990 spec and there's only the 0450 ones, which is the same spec, but the other grading, that's fine. Just use those papers for practice.
We're saying where to look. If you can't remember the names of these websites, the HE Exams Wiki, go to the subject page. I have linked where to find past papers for every single specification that I've amended the page for now. And I think there's only about 3 or 4 subjects I've not got round to doing yet. So most of them have got links textbooks, revision resources, and past papers.
Yeah.
So directly off the subject pages on the wiki. So that really is the go-to place. But more that.
Yeah.
We always flag it up for new home educators, but it's not just for new home educators. Every time you do a spec, it's there.
And it, you know, you can look at it and there's so much information there, but once you know that actually there's stuff for your subject, just go and look at that page. I'll have all the links. So regional papers, we talked about that a little bit for Cambridge. That's where there's, so they'll have paper 1, if they have got a paper 1, 2 and 3, they'll actually have a 1-1, a 1-2 and a 1-3 for the 3 different settings as well, the 3 different time zones. Edexcel also have this. Edexcel refer to them with an R after the paper number. So you'll have a paper 1 and you'll have a paper 1R. And again, they're all absolutely fine for practice. What that meant is during the exam sitting, the one that was sat in sort of UK and close to the UK is the paper 1, and ones that were sat far enough on the other side of the world that they couldn't sit them at the same time would be the 1R papers. So any of them are fine for practice.
It's worth knowing where there's been changes when the spec changed. So Edexcel, HEQA, they make this fairly nice because it says on the website they're just available from, if you go into the spec page, it will only have specs, the ones which are the same spec. Cambridge change their spec but keep the same numbers. So it's a bit harder then. You sort of need to know when the current spec is for Cambridge.
Is that on the subject pages on the wiki again?
Where I can find the information, yes. So I've tried to add it. I've tried to put the information about that where I can, but often it involves quite a bit of digging to know exactly when it changed. Yeah. For some of the minor specs, particularly, some of them, the most common ones like English are well known, environmental management, I know all that because people are constantly doing them. But some of the older ones or more minor ones, I put what I know, but it's always worth doing a bit of extra digging just in case. I've not necessarily wanted to spend hours and hours trying to research when it changed, but
yeah. And again, exams group and subject specific Facebook groups are good places to go because there'll be people who have looked at this recently and they can tell you that. That is something to be a bit wary of if you are just going to a generic website. And I mean, I think something like Physics and Maths Tutor and Maths Genie, they will have past papers, but they will often keep going to the previous spec change. So you do need to be aware that those question papers are not going to be quite the same as what they're asking you now.
And we're not saying that you can't use older papers. You just have to know what the spec changes were. So sometimes I'm about to start teaching travel and tourism and the spec is changing quite a bit. So I'm going to have to go over and work out which, but I'm not going to have past papers to practice, but I am going to have, I will be able to find bits and bobs. So we'll just be able to pull out questions from the old papers. They just won't look exactly the same, but there's enough of an overlap that you'll find stuff. But it's about researching in those cases. I mentioned changes due to COVID. Some subjects particularly had quite big changes during COVID to how the exam paper looked. So you need to be aware when you're practicing, if you're using 2021 papers or 2022 papers, what subjects were affected by changes. And the big ones are English Lit, History, and in 2022 Geography. I think they're the ones where the papers did. Like,
yeah.
Everything else was just things like formula sheets and stuff like that, wasn't it? And some of that's carried over till this year, so it's not such a big thing. But the history papers, there was differences, and the English Lit papers, there was differences, and in 2022 geography was different as well.
Yeah, and they were different by mostly by taking out a section. It was slightly different for each of them, but so you, for instance, for the EdXL IGCSE in English literature, they just didn't have the poetry component. So there'll be some of those papers that just don't have one of the questions that is normal, that will be in it this year.
And AQA, again, they took out the poetry, but they totally mashed around the papers. So
Right.
what is paper 1 or paper 2 this year is sort of totally different to what was last year. And then there was individual ones. History, they broke down some of the papers into 2 bits, or you've got different routes. So
different options.
If in doubt, ask on the exams group. There is a page on the wiki that's summer 2022 exam changes that mention it for last year. I've started adding these changes to the past papers page on the wiki, so that it's there for people to look at, but it'll take me a few days to finish it off because a few bits.
Yeah. So then how do you use these past papers once you've found them? And the way you perhaps think of using them is the way they do a mock in a school, and you sit down in exam conditions and they do the whole paper, they can't look anything out, and then you mark it and you see how they did. That is one way you can use them. It's definitely worth doing that at least once, because they do need to know how all the timings work. You do need to know where they're at if they're not looking up answers anywhere else, but that is not the only way to use past papers. You can also use them not timed. That's often a really useful thing early on. You can use them just as examples of questions and not worry about whether they actually know it themselves. It's fine. Use them as a learning experience to say, right, okay, so we're going to go and look that up. What can be quite a useful technique is to do a little bit of both. So get them to have a go first in one color pen, but then if they don't know it, if they're just going to leave that blank, that's a bit of a waste of a past paper question. So then they can go and look it up, but write that in a different color so that you know how much of it they did just know and how much of it they needed to, you still need to revise and learn. You can use them as exemplars. So you can actually sit there with a mark scheme for what they were looking for and say, right, okay, so with these, again, perhaps for essay questions, that's quite useful sometimes to say, right, these are the points that I wanted to get in there. How could I write a really good essay that hit all those points?
Yeah, it's something I definitely do with mine. We go from the mark scheme to the question, or sometimes we'll do them open book. We'll teach you how to answer an exam essay, do it open book, and then mark it, and then we will try and rewrite it. And we did that particularly a lot with English with the when we were trying to get the writers' effects in.
Yeah, absolutely. So they are a resource. They don't only have to be an exam. You can use them in lots of different ways.
And particularly when we notice these ones that are changes due to COVID, where it probably isn't suitable to actually do them one-to-one sort of as a mock, because it's not what you're going to get in the exam this year. That doesn't mean they're not useful. Use the questions individually. They're still a great resource.
Yeah, and marking, this is a big question. There are mark schemes on all of the exam board websites to go with all of the official past papers that have been sat. So it depends on the subject, to be honest, how familiar you are with it, how easy it is to mark. I tend to find maths and science fairly easy, partly because I know that, and partly because they're reasonably straightforward, and the mark schemes sort of say what you can give marks for and what you can't. I find things like English and history a lot harder because they have levels, and you sort of have to have an idea of what kind of quality that essay is to put it into a level. And that's something that if you haven't got that practice, it can be a lot more difficult to do. It can be learnt. There are rules about how you do it, and you can learn how to match that up. It does explain everything, and it's just a question of your confidence, whether you can use that mark scheme yourself to get to an actual kind of confident mark. you can also get other people to help you with that. So we will often use an external service. So we tend to self-study most things, not all, but most things. But we will quite often, when it comes to the revision stage, take a past paper and send that off to a marking service to get a mark back, because I'm just not confident in some subjects to know where that level is, and I want to know whereabouts they're sitting, so we know what to focus on and how to help. A lot of tutors will offer that. There's some services that just do it. There's Mark My Papers, is one we've used a lot. That was set up by a home educator to provide you with examiners who can, they can mark most subjects, and you can choose your own exam paper with them, and they'll give you quite a lot of feedback. Obviously that's a paid service, because you're paying an examiner to do that and to craft that feedback for you. Edexcel offer some subjects that they will do an on-screen mock that they will get marked for you. So you can buy a package from them, and your child sits and types an English paper on the computer. That goes off to their markers, and they come back and they give you a mark and a grade. They don't give you any particular feedback, but it does give you that confidence of, particularly if you've marked it yourself as well, if the examiner's marks and your marks are adding up, that's good. That helps your confidence. If they're not, then you know that there's something you can adjust, either what you're doing, or you can say, right, okay, we'll just get something else to help with that.
And don't underestimate the thing of help of your child self-marking.
Yeah.
Usually with your help, mine would never actually mark on their own. They needed me sitting there to look over their shoulder. But looking at the mark schemes together, what would you do for this, is a really, really helpful way of
and looking at what marks are given for, because again, there are patterns, there are particular things, and that slightly goes with those command words. So again, if you've looked in the Getting Started word guide, and my kids, if I just say, look, if you've got this sort of a question, you need to make this point followed by that point, they don't take it as well from me as they do when they've looked at a mark scheme, and the mark scheme says there is 1 mark for this and there is 2 marks for this, and you cannot give that second mark unless it's the first one. With me, they'll argue it, but if it's written down on the mark scheme, that is what the examiner is going off. So that can help convince some children that actually they do need to phrase it in the way you've told them they need to phrase it, because that's how you get marks, and otherwise you don't.
And it's also when you've got a mark scheme, particularly with essay-based subjects, more humanities, longer things, you are not trying to necessarily get the content that they say. They have something that they say indicative content. So they cannot list every possible right answer. What that indicative content is done, that is written after the papers have been marked, when they've chosen, and what that is the most common answers, basically. So they're trying to give you what are the most common ways that students answered this and got the marks. If your child has included something that isn't there but is correct, as long as it fits with the style of the mark scheme, they'll get the marks. And it just takes your confidence with that to actually do it. What you're looking at is the marking grid when it's a level marker thing, more than anything else. The indicative content is helpful, but the marking grid is what you are focused on. Unfortunately, the big downside of that is it does rely on you knowing the content too. So I have had to learn it pretty much, because my mother didn't work with tutors that much. I've learned every subject that he's done that way, really. It's time consuming, but it's doable. Up until sort of later times where he did actually get reasonably independent to do it himself. I didn't need to know it so much. They do get there.
And again, that is subject dependent. For sciences, mark schemes kind of work the other way. You start to spot after a while in the repeated questions the sorts of phrases that they're looking for. And again, it doesn't have to be exactly that. Sometimes there are key words in sciences that you have to include. If you haven't included the key word, you won't get the mark. But often it's you need to have that idea, but you can see if they've got, you know, standard phrasing that they're looking for. The one thing I say to my kids is make it easy for the examiner to give you the mark. They want to give you the mark, but they're also probably a bit tired. You know, they've done a full day's work. Their kids were ill that night. They've got 400 papers to mark by the end of the month, and they really want it to be easy for them. So if you phrase things in the way they're expecting, you set things out so it's clear, you know, where your what and what your why is and how things link together, it makes it easy for them. And at the end of the day, yes, it is on them to work out and to, you know, do their best and try and explain if you have explained it in a roundabout way and still give you the mark. But the easier you make it, the more likely you are to actually get that. So, and it's you that needs the marks. It's not them. It's the child sitting the exam that needs to get the mark at the end of the day. So they will argue the toss with you over whether they should have got it or not. And if I'm marking, I will tend to mark pretty strictly, and this depends on your child. You know, some of them need the encouragement and some of them need the pick up the bum, and you know which one is going to work with your child and what they need at any point. I will tend to mark strictly on the grounds that then we'll get a happy surprise when at the end of the exam, not a sad surprise. So I tend not to give benefit of the doubt. In exams they often do, but you can't guarantee it. And the easier, the more you hit the key phrases and the standard ways of putting things to make it really obvious that you've asked the question they've answered the question they've asked. And that can be a really good exam technique tip, is once you've written your answer, reread the question and check that your answer matches it, because you might quite often you sort of focus on the early bit and you answer that and actually there was a next bit at the end that you've skipped over. So get your child to double check that they've actually answered all the different bits of the question. And again, them going through and doing it with mark schemes themselves will help to sort of cement that. And also examiners' reports. They can be really good, useful things for you as a parent, but also for your child to read and to see what it is that examiners are looking for, what things they point out. Because the examiner's report is the chief examiner, after they've looked at all of the papers in a season, writing up, and they'll say something like, question 4, most students answered this pretty well. A lot of them got confused about these 2 different topics. A lot of them didn't mention this thing that was really important to mention. So you read a few of those and you sort of go, oh, okay, so those things actually are important. They're not, you know, I didn't realize that they really needed me to say that in that way. And after a while, you spot that that is what the examiners are looking for. So, yeah.
They're on the websites usually where you found the past papers. They'll have question paper, mark scheme, examiner's report. So all 3 are really useful. And they work together. They're there for a reason.
And so the final point about grade boundaries.
Yeah, so I've got cells here, but all you need to do to find grade boundaries is Google HEQA grade boundaries, OCR grade boundaries. Stick it into Google, they come up. So
the way grade boundaries work is that they will add up all of the marks that you get on each question. And then that mark will translate to a particular grade. It's not always the same because, you know, however well they try, they can't make the exam papers in different years be exactly the same level of difficulty. So what the aim of grade boundaries, and it was a little bit different over COVID, but generally the aim of grade boundaries is to make sure that a student with the same ability who sits the exam in 2 different years will still get the same grade, even if actually one of those years it was a little bit easier. So the way they work that out is by looking at the sorts of the grades everybody got. And in general, you know, if you're looking at 3 or 4 different people, they can vary massively. That's fine. But if you're looking over, you know, 500,000 people like they are for a maths GCSE, it tends to look roughly the same distribution of how overall they do. So if everybody in one year was getting a few more marks than they did in the previous year, that probably means the paper was a bit easier. it's unlikely to mean that all 500,000 of them were better that year than they were the year before. Individual ones will be, but not across everybody. So they look at they will change the grade boundaries in each sitting to sort of make the grades fit roughly where they think they should fit based on, and they actually do base it a little bit on those students. They look at previous attainment, and lots of factors go in to how they get those grades. It isn't just a case that, you know, the top 10% get something. There's a lot of statistics goes into it, but the upshot is it will be a different. You can't say I've got 75, that's going to be an 8. It will change year on year, and these tables are where you look up in that year what it was.
And it's worth notional components is a rough grade per paper. So they're not exact because you're not given a grade per paper, you're given a grade for the total exam, but they give you a grade per paper just so that you've got something to work off for mocks, really, isn't it? Rough idea. Edexcel do theirs separately. HEQA, they're on the same document. OCR, they're on the same document. I don't know any others, other ones I teach. Cambridge's are knocking around, they look a bit different, don't they? I'll find the Cambridge grade threshold in a second. They do look a bit different. With these, you're only ever making an estimate. So based on the past papers, because it's slightly different. It's worth being aware that grade boundaries have been generous during COVID, and they are sliding back towards pre-COVID levels now. That is the aim, at least, to transition back to pre-COVID levels. What it will mean for grade boundaries this summer, we don't know. We don't know what the grade boundaries will be till they sit them. For my students, when I'm marking mocks, etc., at the moment, I'm using the pre-COVID levels as a rough idea to say it was roughly this.
Yeah, so that's generally 2019.
Yeah, but I always say it's only roughly.
Yeah.
Because we won't know until the papers are sat. Last year, you had the extra of advanced notification. We don't know what that really did to the grade boundaries properly, do we? So you'll see, you've got figures. Let me put business. So
these are for both, and
two papers come together to mark 180. If you've done the two papers and you've got 100 on both, 100 over the two papers, that's grade 6.
Yeah, and there are some papers, mostly Cambridge, I think, where they have different weightings, and again, they don't just add the papers for the two up together, they like double one of them. And we're doing a Cambridge subject and I haven't managed to work out how they're doing it this year on the subject we're doing. I'm sure someone knows, but I don't. And there is, to some extent, it doesn't matter. We all really love getting an exam paper and saying, right, that's a grade 6. But it doesn't actually matter. What matters is that you get as many marks as you can. And if you take that exam paper, you try and figure out how to get a few more marks the next time. So it's really hard. We all love the grades, but don't get too hung up on them. What matters is how you get some more marks. Yeah,
I actually don't say a mark to my son. We look at well, I don't say grade. We look at the mark and then how do you get more marks? Yeah. That is always our thing. Earlier on, we did the odd one with a grade because it helps motivation. But largely we focus on the mark, and it's not, oh, I've got that grade, therefore I'm fine. It's always, well, how do we get the next marks? What marks have we lost and where can we get them? Generally, we focus on where are the silly mistakes. So sometimes there's obviously big gaps of knowledge, but largely we look at, well, we didn't format that question correctly. learn how to format that question. And we're okay.
Particularly, and with maths and sciences, like drawing a graph and labeling your axes and using a straight line, there are sort of, from that very first paper, there are normally a good 4 or 5 marks that you can pick up just by going, okay, if I've got a graph, I've got to label my axes, because there'll be a mark for that. And if you just didn't remember it, you could have done it easily, you just didn't remember that you had to. And then that's another couple of marks. And it doesn't often take very many marks to move you up a grade threshold. There's lots of grades now, and it can be a surprisingly low number of marks to sort of start getting fairly decent grades. And then you just got to keep improving, keep getting a few extra marks each time, and it'll move up the layers.
We've gone
Right,
I have to say we've overgone this time.
somewhat over time for us.
We did say earlier on that we'd struggle with the timing, so we'll do a quick. Have you got any questions? I haven't seen any come up in the chat.
No, I haven't seen anyone. Hopefully people can actually still hear us. If not, they can watch it on YouTube on double quick time. And if people are watching on YouTube, you can email me at katie@heca.uk, or you can join the Facebook exams group, which is a great way to get access to thousands of other people as well, and not just me or Sarah and what we happen to know. Lots of people who have gone through pretty much every single situation that there is and are ready to help you for questions. So that is a brilliant place to go and get help.
Louise, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, please, if that's okay. If my daughter is doing English language IGCSE through Edexcel, she won't be doing it till either 2024 or 25. How will I know if I look at the spec now and she's on a program for that? How will I know that the anthologies and that are going to be the same?
They would have announced if there's changes by now, because if you think schools teach the subject over 2 years.
Right, okay.
So,
that's what I was kind of assuming, but I wanted to check.
Yeah, I can say, so anyone starting September now, well, September 2023 will be aiming for exams in June 2025 at the earliest, if it was a school. So
Right.
they you get small tweaks sometimes
Yeah.
that come up quite suddenly, but anything major is there's quite a big turnaround in how long you have to prepare. Certainly, certainly you're definitely okay for 2024. I would say now keep an eye on it for the next 6 months, but you'll be fine for 2025.
Okay. And with past papers as well, how does that work? Do you know?
In terms of
If
When
they
it
change.
comes, yeah, because they would have changed from the anthologies and things from past papers.
The anthology for English language has been the same since this spec came out, which was, I think 2019 was the first exam. So if you look on the specification website, I think it does say issue 4 or 5, but there's very small changes. They're just like correcting typos and things.
Right, okay.
At the start of the anthology, I think there's a little change list. So it will say what the changes are, and you can see that they are quite minor. So in terms of the actual extracts, if they're changing those, there will be a lot of notice, and it will be on the spec page. So again, if you sort of get to know that spec page, the specification itself and everything on there, any changes will be flagged up on that page.
Brilliant. Okay, that's great. Can I just ask one more question about biology?
Yeah.
I just wanted to know if we're doing just a single biology, is there a foundation and a higher on that, or just?
Not for IGCSE.
Right, okay.
So IGCSEs, they're the same to you. For Edexcel, I should say, Cambridge have core and extended.
Right, okay.
So core is grades 1 to 5. Is that right, Katie?
I think so. Yeah, I think they are effectively a foundation and higher
Yeah, I
option.
think, yeah.
Right.
But at standard is 1 to 9.
Yeah.
So it's slightly different to the overlap that you normally get. But Cambridge is, the standard is 1 to 9, and the core I think is 1 to 5. It might be 1 to 4, but I'm pretty sure it's 1 to 5.
Yeah. Okay. All right. That makes sense. Thank you.
Can you put your email in the chat, Katie?
Yeah, we'll do.
Yeah. How do we try and stay motivated and not get distracted?
When you find out.
Yeah. I think it's this is where we were saying, this is where you have to recognise it's their exams. You can't force them to revise. There has to be a limit of what they. Some ones I have, it's the opposite. You have to drag them away. Mine, not so much. It has to be said.
Yeah, and with mine, so you can't force them, but you can encourage them. You can get involved. So again, that's the thing that we do with flashcards. You know, it can't just be me sitting there and saying, right now you need to do your flashcards. That doesn't go down well. But if I sit there and I kind of like, right, come on then. So tell me about Hitler's rise to power. Come on, what happened here? Oh, was it this? Was it that? Oh, and what else about that? And extend it. So if you can get involved and you can kind of pull them along with a little bit of enthusiasm. Sometimes, again, it does depend on the child. But yeah, I do find they do want it to be a sociable experience. They have to kind of get involved. Just sitting there and going over and over facts is not that fun, even if you're kind of quite motivated and you want to do it. So whatever you can do to just make it a bit more of a interesting experience.
But in the exam centre, it depends on your exam centre. So real popular ones, it can be quite early. Where I work, we try and get people to be starting to book nearly a year ahead. Certainly we need to be booked by November for the summer, end of November. But other places you can go up until much later.
I've just put the Facebook exams group link in the chat as well.
But really, for summer exams, I will be booking before Christmas.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, this can be a reasonable time to start asking for summer. June 24, you probably wouldn't put anything firm in now, but it might be a good time to sort of start asking around exam centres for what's available a year in advance. Because right now it's a bit of a lull. They're not in super. They've just put entries in for this season and they're not into all the details of next season. So it can be a good spot to ask. Other than that, early in the autumn term is a good time as well.
You did
For getting in touch with that
the
following
exams
summer.
office early, did you? You ever see what it's like? No, it's it's always pretty manic.
Well, yeah, but it's
well,
yeah. Slightly different.
We're
to
in the
middle
stage of all the
season.
things.
But in November 2025, what will you be able to do? And they're like, I'm thinking about this week. I don't know.
Yeah, but yeah, there's no exams on at the moment, so it's the practicals and stuff that are getting done. So it's a little bit quieter. The lull before the storm.
Yeah. Right, I
We
think
got
that
any more? I think we're done. We've hit 9 o'clock, so we've gone for an hour and a half, which is.
we have. If anyone's watching on YouTube, you should have watched it on double time. you get that option. And for anyone taking exams this summer, good luck. Enjoy it as much as you can. At least enjoy it being over and moving on to the next thing. All right, thank you, Sarah. You're going to stop the recording now.